Welcome to Reformation 2017, Re-Fermenting the Church, Part 3C. My name is Ron Rude. We're in Part 3 now, the heart of these 12 Ron Talks, and I'm suggesting that it is time for a re-fermenting of the Christian church. That is, for an alternative version or brew of Christian theology and practice to emerge. We're looking in this part through the lens of the natural sciences, especially astronomy and geology, evolutionary biology, and paleoanthropology, in order to see more clearly God's mammoth history of the universe and multi-leveled and layered and unfolding story of life, a story that is vast and ancient. In a Tov, that is, good universe, that even includes our planet, Earth, and life forms like you and me, our immediate predecessor species began appearing about 3 to 4 million years ago: Australopithecus, Homo habilis, Homo erectus, and about 13 others, with Homo sapiens emerging about 200,000 years ago, and a more modern form of Homo sapiens appearing about 70,000 years ago. Now, 200,000 years might seem like a long time, but really it is a relatively minuscule era. Think about it. If you were to take your laptop computer and push the dash button on the key, each time you push it representing 200,000 years, to cover the 3.8 billion years that life has been thriving on Earth, you would need to push that key 19,000 times. We humans represent one of these dashes, and who knows if we'll be around for the next one. But we are here now, and in the Creator's household there are many dwelling places. And as humans, we have been allowed to take up residence in one of these dwelling places. So God's primary mission has been going on for 13.7 billion years at least. This story is recorded in nature's scriptures for the past 13.7 billion years, and I believe is being read today by every ecosystem and every species in the universe in their own language. So what about what I am calling God's secondary mission? I have 3 questions to pose, questions for which I will try to offer a narrative answer. And the 3 questions are these. First, why are Judaism and Christianity so recent? The director of Judaic Studies at the University of Arizona, where I serve, says that there is no evidence of anything having to do with Hebrews or Israel or Judaism or Torah or any such thing prior to about 3,500 years ago. And Christianity, of course, is a little less than 2,000 years old. Now, if you are someone who believes that these religions are human contrivances, the question for you is, well, why did they emerge then? And if you believe, as I do, that they were planted and fashioned by God, well, the same question. Why then? And why so recent? The second question is this. Why is the central and foundational message of both the Old Testament and New Testament a declaration and affirmation of the reign of God? The reign of God as opposed to the reign of who or what? And third, why is this message addressed to a species that calls itself Homo sapiens, which means wise one? Notice I said calls itself wise one. I'm not so sure the rest of the community of life or even God concurs. Well, I don't know the answer to these questions, but I do have a theory sparked by a wonderful author named Daniel Quinn, especially one of his books entitled Ishmael. And the theory as to why these religions are so brand new is this. Recently, a new narrative began to emerge among some cultures in our species. Of the tens of thousands of human cultures spread around the planet, a few began to embrace this new narrative. The concept of narrative can also be called a worldview or a story or a myth. Families have certain narratives or myths about themselves that seem to play out through various characteristics from generation to generation. Nations, too, have myths about themselves that shape their character and behavior in economics and wars. And even species, I believe, have an internal, visceral narrative that shapes how they see themselves and how they fit into this planet. So, what was this new narrative that emerged recently within our species? Well, rather than this marvelous earth belonging to the whole community of life, including us, we have a right to be here, the new narrative that emerged among a few human cultures of humans was earth belongs to humans. Rather than a narrative and way of life where people lived as though the earth belongs to the whole community of life, including us, a visceral and internal narrative that has been guiding every ecosystem and creature for billions of years, including tens of thousands of human cultures around the planet for at least a couple 100,000 years. Recently, some cultures began to change this worldview narrative to earth belongs to us. These people started to think of themselves as special, as not only special in relation to other creatures, but more special than all other creatures put together. They began to see themselves as separate from the rest of God's creation, superior to the rest of creation, the reason for everything, and as having a perverse and made-up manifest destiny to be rulers of earth's land and seas, every square inch. In our day, though this narrative, as I said, is relatively new among our species, only several thousand years old, it is now the air we breathe and the airwaves that propagandize us 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. The 5th century BCE Greek philosopher Protagoras put it this way: man is the measure of all things. We are to be the yardstick, plumb line, and standard by which everything else in God's creation is to be judged and valued. Francis Bacon described it for his time and culture. Man, if we look to final causes, may be regarded as the center of the world, insomuch that if man were taken away from the rest of the world, the rest would seem to be all astray without aim or purpose. I find myself saying, really? And look at how John Jay, our first Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, described the American continent in the early 1800s. Extensive wildernesses, now scarcely known or exposed, remain yet to be cultivated, and vast lakes and rivers whose waters have for ages rolled in silence and obscurity to the oceans are yet to hear the din of industry and become subservient to commerce, and boast villas and gilded spires and spacious cities rising on their banks. Well, as various cultures began to adapt and adopt this new narrative of superior to, separate from, the reason for, and the rulers of, these cultures became conquistadors. They became dominators, colonizers. They became takers, who took and took and took from the blessings of God's creation, and seldom, if ever, returned in equal measure those blessings to God's world. Vis-a-vis nature, the creed became, the world is a jungle, a dangerous, deficient, defiant, disorderly enemy. It is wild and needs to be tamed, broken and needs to be fixed, inept in need of conquering, a wasteland that needs to be developed. Furthermore, the garden was made for humans. We must conquer it. We must rule it. We must use it as desired and discard the rest as expendable. We should not stop our quest to command land, sea, sky, weather, wildlife, bacteria, genes, until this holy mission is fulfilled and creation lies bleeding at our feet, until we have transformed both God and nature into our image. This narrative worldview myth is sometimes called human exceptionalism. Others refer to it as anthropocentrism or anthroponarcissism. A friend of mine calls it diva theology. I like the term humanism. That is, in comparison to other creatures, we think we are the head of the class, the front of the line, the top of the toppest. We fancy ourselves as the center of the universe and behave night and day as though this planet, every square foot, on the surface and beneath the surface, in the oceans and ice caps, on a micro and macro level, all of it belongs to us. So as this worldview continued to take root, as more and more cultures began to regress into this worldview of humanism, our species began to grow more and more out of relationship with our human neighbors, with God's creation, so that in our twisted minds, nature became a thing, and it a mere commodity. We grew more and more out of relationship with our own inner spirits and souls and selves too. And we spiraled out of relationship with God. Daniel Quinn suggests that although the biblical fall stories in Genesis 3 and following are not historical in the sense that there was an actual Adam and Eve who mated with each other and whose kids mated with each other and their cousins and uncles and aunts, and this is how the earth became populated with humans. And then, because these first unborn parents disobeyed God by eating the forbidden fruit of the tree, well, now we have sin in the world. He also doesn't deem this story to be merely symbolic. That is, a parable about how we as humans tend to obey God or cover up our sins, and then if caught, we hide and feign deniability. We do these things, certainly, but this is not what the story is about. Rather, in Quinn's view, these are deeply thoughtful parables trying to address actual historical circumstances that the storytellers were experiencing in their time, 3,000 to 4,000 years ago, and in their community in the Middle East. Troubling changes were infiltrating their homes from other parts of the globe. Alternative worldviews, haughty self-understandings, boorish behaviors that had originally emerged in only a few isolated human communities a few thousand years earlier were now arriving at the storyteller's doorstep, spreading disintegration of well-being and producing toxic forms of denigration. Why do these people behave this way, the storytellers wondered. So they devised parables to try and articulate this. Parables like eating from a forbidden tree of knowledge of good and evil, and thereby trespassing into God's domain and starting to think that they were God. Or Abel representing those cultures that lived God's way being destroyed by the Cains of this world. And even a parable of human arrogance about building a tower to the heavens to make a name for ourselves. And so God's creation, including humanity, began to ache and sting and groan. Daniel Erlander refers to Genesis 6:6, early in the Bible, as the saddest verse in the Bible. Feel the weight of these words. The Lord was sorry that he had made humankind on the earth, and it grieved him to his heart. And so the Lord faced a dilemma. What to do? Ignore these creatures? Permit them to continue their misbehavior? Punish them? Allow them to go extinct? Destroy them? The storytellers portray the Creator as considering such courses of action. I will blot out from the earth the human beings I have made. Destroy or try to heal? What will God do? What would you do? Apparently, God must have thought, well, can a mother destroy her children? Can a father kill one of his kids? And why would I want to start acting like this destructive human creature? So apparently, God decided to try and heal us. And so in addition to God's primary mission, God's full-time job, the unfolding story of life in this universe, God has recently taken on a lesser and secondary mission, that is, to try and heal a species gone awry. The question then becomes, well, how is God going to do this? This is what the rest of the biblical story is about after Genesis 6:6. God's secondary mission to heal and restore our species. In the next Ron Talk 3D, we will look at this story and consider what God is doing to bring us back into the fold.